Well, actually, let's take a step back before, I mean, monetization of the deficit is just one part of the story. I mean, I think the first thing we need to do is to be clear, what is it that will cause the recovery to take place? So I want to digress a little. I'll come back to your point. You know, I expect that you'll see a massive negative growth in the first quarter. And you know, even though by the end of June, it may be said that the lockdown is now being relaxed, the truth of the matter is that it will take the economy a certain amount of time to get back to normal. So I certainly don't expect to see a recovery to normal in the second quarter. So really between now and September, we're going to have a significantly depressed level of GDP. From that depressed level, yes, in the second half of the year, you may see an improvement, okay? Now, the issue is, first of all, what can the government do to counter this? Well, first thing is that you've got to put an end to the lockdown, because if the lockdown is in place, then essentially you're not allowing supply to increase. Maybe if you believe that you have to control infections and so on, you're willing to take that cost, but then you must be willing to take that cost. But you should be clear that unless we can actually get largely rid of the lockdown, there's not going to be much recovery. So what are the things you can now do? Well, I think that, you know, you've had a massive reduction in demand, partly because people have lost income, and partly also because, you know, export demand is very low because the global economy is very low. So if you want to get the economy back to something like normal, you have to act on the demand side to stimulate the economy once you started relaxing on the supply side. That's where the fiscal deficit issue comes in. I mean, clearly, government can always spend more if private spending has gone down. That will increase the fiscal deficit. That's not the only thing that's going to increase the fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit is also going to increase because the fall in income and output has led to a huge fall in tax revenues. So you're going to have a loss of tax revenues. I don't think you're going to get much privatization revenue this year. You're going to also have some increase in expenditure, although the package of 20 lakh crores doesn't have very much of direct increase in expenditure beyond what was already in the budget. I mean, I've seen some estimates, and the direct fiscal stimulus is only about 1% of GDP. Some people think a little more. That's actually much lower than most other countries are doing. So the question that comes up is, should the government be doing a bigger stimulus on demand and living with a higher fiscal deficit? Now, my view is that it is an exceptional situation. People will understand that the fiscal deficit, you can't apply the rules to the fiscal deficit that you would apply normally, okay? So for the current year, you have to allow the fiscal deficit to expand. And then the second question is, how do you finance that? You know, my view is that the debate on direct monetization of the fiscal deficit is a little bit irrelevant. I mean, in the sense that the RBI can, so to speak, support this borrowing, even if it doesn't directly buy government bonds in the primary issue. They can buy in the secondary market, they can sort of transfer some of their accumulated reserves, which is the same thing as monetization, really. And the short answer, therefore, is that this year, whether the RBI monetizes or doesn't monetize is less critical than what's the size of the fiscal deficit that you can tolerate. And I think indirect monetization is going to take place, and there's nothing wrong with it. What I think that doesn't mean, by the way, that this is not a problem. Because after all, if our capacity to produce GDP is permanently impacted, then we cannot expect that we'll maintain everybody's income and consumption at last year's level. But if what we're saying is that, look, it's been impacted this year, and let's say from next year onwards, we're going to get back to some sort of reasonable norm, then what the rating agencies need to know is that, look, if your fiscal deficit is going through the roof this year, and it will go through the roof, what are you going to do about it next year? Is it going to continue in that way? Now, here you have a problem because we don't have a very good reputation for maintaining our promises about bringing the fiscal deficit down in future years. I mean, this government and also the previous government kind of failed to keep up to those promises. But you know, what is past is past. You have to put across a credible picture that although the fiscal deficit is high this year, we're really going to bring it down next year. If that picture is credible, then I think rating agencies will understand that this year is not the thing to watch at. The thing to watch at is, are we going to do what we say we're going to do for next year? And I personally think the government would be much better off coming clean on this issue and saying, look, for a variety of reasons, the fiscal deficit is going to be much higher, but we promise you we're going to bring it down, and this is what we're going to do to bring it down. And I don't think they've taken that line today. I mean, for example, there's a lot of talk that we're going to borrow maybe 2% of GDP more. But you know, that's not going to be enough because the decline in tax revenues alone will take up that space. So we're going to have more fiscal deficit increase than is currently being accepted. And you know, if the RBI refuses to monetize it, it just means that interest rates will shoot up. Because I don't think that a huge fiscal deficit can be easily financed by bringing in money from outside, because money coming in from outside will look at the macro situation. So I personally think that the RBI should not object to indirect monetization of the deficit, and that's what's going to happen in due course.